No.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Law News Network. We were just watching a little clip of Shayana Jenkins Hernandez. I am here with Shero Esdrin, and I'm also here via Skype with Kathy Russin, who is the mother over at Court Chatter and has been watching this case, and she watched the Odin Lloyd case really closely. So we wanted to make sure that we brought you in, Kathy, and got your take. First of all, I want to ask you, what did you think of Shayana yesterday? How did she do? What was a high point? What was the low point for the prosecution?
So Shayana is, well, what people are referring to as the ride and die chick.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
She's standing by her man. As we know the famous quote now, she knew her role. She knew when to keep her mouth shut. She just set back all of us women by, 100 years or whatever. How ridiculous is that? She was a horrible prosecution witness. She was definitely a hostile witness, but I think they had to put her on.
I agree with you. But do you think that her tone and her inability to remember a single stinking thing could have actually helped the prosecution? Because, again, everybody who touches Aaron Hernandez seems unable to remember anything.
Well, that's the theme.
Right.
Anybody everyone that he surrounded himself with are still loyal.
Right.
They're still loyal for whatever reason. They may all have different reasons for that, but they all have faulty memories, and nobody wants to testify against him. And yes, I think that helped the prosecution. She helped the prosecution by not remembering anything.
Right.
But the fact that he called her right after the shootings.
Yep.
And she has no memory of that. Now, granted, she could have been asleep, and that could have gone to voicemail, and so that wouldn't have jogged anything for her. But the fact that she's like, no, that wouldn't have been a big deal, and maybe that's not a big deal. Maybe he often, called her drunk after the clubs in the middle of the night, and that's not a big deal for her. But she had. Everything about her was, I don't remember, until it was cross-examination. And the thing I tweeted is the second cross-examination started, I tweeted, this will not feel like cross-examination, this will feel like a direct examination.
That's right.
She's really a defense witness.
Yes, absolutely.
And then her memory immediately cleared up on cross-examination, and she was able to answer questions.
Yeah.
Because that's still her man.
That's right. I think Cheryl had a question. Did you have a question, Cheryl?
Right. She didn't say, although the prosecution, she didn't help the prosecution one bit because she couldn't substantiate one piece of evidence that, or circumstantial evidence that the prosecution wanted to put in, and they were hoping that she would substantiate that. Don't you agree?
Well, I think they knew that she wasn't going to help them.
Right.
Then why
unlike the other guys from the SUV, the night that Bradley was shot, I mean, those guys, they thought were going to give them more information because they have their grand jury testimony. But with Shayana, they knew what they were getting. They knew but they put her on anyway because they did want to substantiate the call that night from Boston.
17 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think she did better than she did at the last trial? I know at the last trial it was similar. She was unable to remember a whole lot there. I actually think she did a little bit better this time. What did you think?
She did better. The last trial, she had more of a role,
right?
Because
absolutely.
That all happened right there at her home,
right,
and near her home, and that was completely different.
Right.
This didn't really involve her a lot. So. I don't know. We really all sat back and waited for her. And in the end, it's a lot for people that watched the trial to talk about. But I don't know what the jury is going to do with her. Probably not anything.
I agree with you 100%. We love to talk about it because it's interesting and it's better than this detective who's been on the stand all day today. But ultimately, the jury probably will get more from the detective than they got from Shayana. No, we were talking about this as we were watching that clip. Kathy, what do you think? Do you have a clue what Baez is going to do now that he's got the case in his hands?
Do we ever know what Baez is going to do? So, you asked me when we were on break there if you think there's going to be any kind of bombshell drop from him because that's what he likes to do. I don't know that he's got any kind of bombshell. What his theme is that Bradley is the shooter, that this was all about drugs and a drug deal, that the victims were drug buyers, that Alexander Bradley's a drug dealer, and that's what this was about. When Baez was questioning the victim's sisters, now we have to go clear back to day one of the trial. They were witnesses. They were the very first two witnesses on the stand. He would say, "Did you know that your brother was doing drugs? Would it surprise you to know that he was doing? Would it surprise you to know that he had drugs in his system?" Well, guess what? We've heard nothing about that.
Right.
We're weeks into the trial, and we've heard nothing about that. But that's what Baez is famous for in the Casey Anthony case, is dropping a bombshell that then by the end of the case was never proven and there was no evidence of. But that's the theme. The theme is it's all about drugs, and that poor Aaron Hernandez had nothing to do with any of this.
Well, and that might be what we're going to see some of. You know, we may see, and we've talked about this a little bit, Cheryl and I, earlier today, that in his opening, Baez said, Bradley's the devil, and now he almost gets to play prosecutor and put on a case against Bradley. So maybe we'll see some testimony about what was in the victim's systems, and maybe we'll see some testimony about what was going on with Bradley, and, you know, sort of establishing a case against Bradley. That would make sense given what we've seen so far.
Well, and look, it's probably going to be an easy thing to do,
right.
Easier than what we've seen in other cases. Bradley is not a good guy.
Right.
He's not a clean guy.
Yep.
He's not, you know, when Bradley, this case is so fascinating for me, so fascinating, because when Bradley was on the stand, I'm in the chat rooms and on social media, and because trial watchers cannot stand Jose Baez,
Yes.
they cannot stand Aaron Hernandez, they're rooting for Alexander Bradley,
Yep.
who's a drug dealer,
Yep.
who shot up clubs and tried to kill people. You know, they're rooting for him.
Right.
And I had to keep reminding people, this guy's a bad guy.
Yep. Yeah,
And it's just funny how everything's so subjective.
That's right. It's all like,
In
who's
this
the worst case scenario. But it's funny because a lot of people were rooting for Bradley to beat Baez. I think that's also this idea that, you know, a common day criminal can beat this high-powered, fancy attorney. And he did. Don't you think he held his own?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Bradley held his own. And the funniest parts of that was Baez trying to talk like he was like a
Oh
bug.
yeah, absolutely. Like he belonged in the street. Yeah, that doesn't go over super well. Now, one of the things that we were also talking about during a break is whether or not, because I think as we look back at this trial, at least for me, everyone's favorite witness was Mick Masters, our street sweeper. And he was called outside the presence of the jury, which many of us forget because he was such a character and up there for such a long time. So he was called outside the presence of the jury, and he testified that he, was never asked about what he put in the hopper, that there was a woman that he saw that he was never asked about. Now, do you think the defense calls him to get that testimony in, or is he just too dangerous for them to put in front of this jury?
Oh, please let the defense call him.
Yeah.
We want nothing more as just an average trial watcher, but to see the guy back on the stand.
Right.
Now, is it good strategy to call him? The defense wants that testimony in about the street sweeper, about the police be having faulty investigation, the crime scene was sloppy, the 6-bullet casing and bullet might be out there, all of that. The street sweeper was intimidated in his questioning. They want that out there. But
Right.
He's a horrible witness.
Yeah.
If you haven't watched that testimony, they need to go find it in the archives and watch it, because he is Mr. Paranoid. He's set up. Everyone's out to get him. He's a horrible witness. But, I don't think Baez is afraid to put him on.
No, and I think that especially given, Crawford, the testimony that Crawford gave, that he was intimidated by the police, that he asked for a lawyer, that he asked for the questioning to stop, that none of that happened, it actually bolsters Mick Masters' testimony that these investigators pressured him. I think it'll be interesting to see, because the street sweeper came up in this last detective's direct examination just very briefly. He said he spoke with the street sweeper, period. So if Baez gets into that a little bit on cross-examination with this particular detective, maybe that will give us some hint as to whether or not he plans to go down that road.
Right. Yeah, I'm very, very curious to see what the defense is going to do next week. Originally, last week, they told the judge their case was going to last about a week.
Yeah.
Now, they've done a really, really good job of putting their case on through cross-examination.
That's right. And it's my favorite thing to do, I've got to tell you. It's so much fun to take someone else's witness and make them your own.
Yep.
It's a lot less stressful, too, don't you think, Cheryl?
Yes, absolutely.
So, I don't know what they have left.
Right. Well, and they need to be selective and know when to cut their losses and run, because this isn't a great case for the Commonwealth, which I know a lot of the trial watchers don't want to hear necessarily, but it's not. This isn't a slam dunk case, and this is look, let's be real. And I've said it all along. This is why Jose Baez took this case.
That's right.
Not making any money off this.
That's right.
He loves publicity. This is what he does. He wanted the publicity of a high-profile case that is a winner.
That's right.
And this is a winner for him because it's not a slam dunk case. And so they need to be very selective about what they do with their case next week, because they've done a good job with cross-examination. Now, I'm not saying this can't end up with a guilty in the end.
Right.
Because they can put this together with a great closing argument, can put this together for the jury.
Right.
And we also never know what those just regular citizens are thinking in that jury box.
Well, right, and there's something to be said for being in the room and getting the actual body language and, things that we might not necessarily see. But I do think the prosecution has a tough road ahead. I also think you made a really good point as far as they need to be careful, because the jury definitely, from what we're hearing from people tweeting in the courtroom, they're getting impatient with this witness today. They've even gotten impatient. And so if that's the case, you don't want to beat a dead horse if you're Baez. Plus, you've got a jury that the majority of the people in that room seem to be sick, so you don't want to keep people there who aren't feeling well just to go over the same stuff over and over again. He better have some really good witnesses, some really strong evidence, and then get the heck out of there.
Yeah, look, people can dislike Jose Baez as much as they want to, but he knows how to try a case. And look at the table. He's got a whole team there that knows how to put on a case. And so I think they will be very selective. I have a witness list here of the defense potential witnesses. There's 280 people on here.
Yeah, Belichick, right?
That's not what's going to happen next week.
No, Bill Belichick's on there, isn't he? Isn't he one of the? Yes, yeah. So,
but everyone is. Anyone that breathes is on here.
Yeah, anyone who ever touched Aaron Hernandez or touched a football that Aaron Hernandez touched. And while I'm sure there's a lot of people who would like to hear from Bill Belichick under oath, that's not going to happen in this case. So most likely not going to happen anyway. So closings. You think it's really important well, first of all, I'm assuming Hagen's, that's the person who's questioning the majority of the witnesses. I'm assuming Hagen's going to give the closing. Would you agree with that?
I would think so. Yeah. That seems logical.
Right.
If nothing else, the rebuttal closing.
Right, sure. Like we saw in the War Machine case where the attorney who had tried the whole thing will give the rebuttal. But what do you think he has to do? It just seems to me that there's so many threads hanging that have to somehow be knitted together, or else he really has not met his burden.
I think that's exactly what he's going to do. And, I've talked a lot about how this case is disjointed and they've not told a great story throughout this case. I think what they're doing with this detective right now is clearing up stuff and clearing up some questions. And that is what is going to happen in closing arguments. There's no doubt in my mind that closing arguments is going to put this case and make it clearer. If it doesn't, that's a real problem. So I think closing arguments should make this case clearer for the jury. Maybe it's clearer for them. I don't know. Maybe they're not as confused as the rest of us, but closing argument should really make it clear, and the defense will definitely be all about Alexander Bradley.
Right, and there's so many on both sides, but there's so many little inconsistencies that hurt credibility. With Shayona Jenkins yesterday, she testified that she was with Aaron Hernandez in Plainville at a time that the cell phone has him in Connecticut. And then all kinds of stuff on the defense side. In fact, I think you tweeted about it, Kathy, about the color of the 4Runner. There's different people talking, it's white, it's dark, it's black, it's a Range Rover, it's an SUV. All of these things, and we know eyewitness testimony is the least reliable testimony, but there's a lot of discrepancies, which then bring me back to what Cheryl and I were talking about this morning, which is this whole thing about reasonable doubt.
Well, here's my thing with the Alexander Bradley shooting. Who shot him that night then? what happened after Tootsie's that made someone else want to try and kill Alexander Bradley?
Right.
For me, all roads lead to Aaron Hernandez that night. For me, that case is pretty solid.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's more solid than the other two murders, because there's no testimony. Maybe the defense is going to pull something out there about who else would want to shoot him and kill him that night when he left in a car with Aaron Hernandez.
Yeah, but you know what, you might be right, because that, you know, that part of the case, my mind always kind of leaves that, because it's two separate cases. You know, and a lot of people online and on Twitter are talking about why are they bothering with this other case, but remember that he could serve up to 10 years for that crime alone.
Well, yeah, but it's not two separate cases,
right.
Because, you know, the Commonwealth is saying the reason that he tried to kill Alexander Bradley is because Bradley said, remember what you did in Boston?
Right.
And now Hernandez has to shut him up. So you really can't have one without the other. So if the jury believes that Hernandez shot Bradley, then they have to believe why.
That's right, and it's and that's why, you know, it's a witness intimidation thing. But the entire crew of people in that car, we heard from everyone except for one witness. Soldier is the one person we didn't hear from. But the entire crew that we did hear from, I mean, they were also quite the characters. You know, this is a trial that could be a mini series in the future, because many of the witnesses were definitely you know, something that you'd write about in Hollywood.
Anyone that says this trial is boring is crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And
if you're a trial watcher, and those people are out there, you know, this is what we do. This is where I came from. If anyone who just loves to observe court proceedings, this is the case. Whether you think it's a weak case or an open and shut case, or you think it's ridiculous because he's already serving a life sentence, this case has everything. All you have to see is the cast of characters that are paraded in this courtroom. It's like unbelievable, and they can't remember anything.
That's right.
And the interesting thing is, this detective has just barely testified that Tyrone Crawford and Pierre at the grand jury didn't have a faulty memory at all and never requested immunity. So isn't that interesting?
Well, it's interesting because he said they didn't have a faulty memory at all, which is interesting. But then he said they didn't request immunity. But we heard from the transcript. Baez actually brought up the transcript where he may not have requested immunity, but he certainly requested to stop the interview, and he certainly requested to speak to a lawyer. So,
well, yes. Well, that's because they're street smart.
Right.
But something's happened between then and there. They were more than willing to speak at the grand jury and tell everything they knew, and now they're not.
Yeah, it's that's absolutely the case. I mean, it's definitely one of those situations where you've got people who, once they're in Aaron Hernandez's specter of influence, whether that's the courtroom or wherever, that it's one of those things where they are not willing to cross him.
Yeah. It's crazy.
You know,
I have a theory, and I'm not going to say it on air, but I have really, really gone over the defense potential witness list to try and figure out who Soldier is. There's one name on there I think it might be.
Oh my goodness, we're going to have to leave that as a tease because they're back in the courtroom, but I want to hear that when this is over. We're going to take you back to the courtroom. Kathy, thank you so much for being with us. We'll continue to stay in touch.
Replica firearm,
We'll take you right back.
placing in different